The cabin of Meridian Airways, Flight 882, fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the sharp click of handcuffs. Tierney, the senior purser, stood with a triumphant sneer, watching the police drag the silent woman in seat 1A out of first class. To Tierney, this was just another non-compliant passenger getting what she deserved. She didn't know that the woman, who hadn't spoken a single word, wasn't just a passenger. She was Velma Simmons, the ghost investor who had secretly acquired the controlling stake of the airline 6 hours ago. And as the handcuffs clicked, Tierney just made the most expensive mistake in aviation history. The early morning air at JFK International Airport was thick with the scent of jet fuel and expensive coffee. Inside the exclusive Meridian Airways first-class lounge, the atmosphere was usually one of hushed reverence, a sanctuary for the elite before they boarded their transatlantic flights. But today, the tension was palpable, radiating from a single interaction near the boarding gate. Velma Simmons adjusted the collar of her oversized beige cashmere sweater. She looked nothing like the typical clientele of Meridian's flagship route to Zurich. There were no Louis Vuitton logos plastered across her chest, no clacking Jimmy Choo heels, and definitely no entourage. She wore worn-in sneakers, black leggings, and a pair of vintage aviator sunglasses that she hadn't removed since entering the terminal. To the untrained eye, she looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong line, perhaps a nanny or an assistant sent ahead of a wealthy employer. To Tierney St. Clair, the senior flight attendant manning the first-class boarding door, Velma looked like a problem. Tierney prided herself on being the gatekeeper of the sky. With 15 years of service, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and a uniform that fit a little tighter than regulation allowed, she viewed the first-class cabin as her personal living room. She had a mental checklist of who belonged and who didn't. Old money aristocrats? Yes. Tech bros in hoodies? Reluctantly, yes. A solitary black woman in nondescript clothing looking tired and distracted? Absolutely not. Velma approached the gate, her boarding pass displayed on her phone. She didn't look up. She was exhausted. The last 48 hours had been a blur of hostile boardroom takeovers, endless contract reviews, and a red-eye flight from Tokyo before connecting here. Her throat was parched, and her vocal cords felt like sandpaper. She had made a vow of silence for the next 8 hours, a technique recommended by her ENT specialist to save her voice for the keynote speech in Zurich. She held the phone out to the scanner. It beeped green. 1A. Tierney blocked the path with a manicured hand. "Excuse me, miss. Group 1 is boarding. That's first class only." Velma didn't speak. She simply pointed to the large 1A on her screen. Tierney squinted at the phone, her smile tight and failing to reach her eyes. "I see the seat number. I just need to verify your ID again. We've had system glitches with upgrades today." It was a lie. There were no glitches. Velma knew it. She paused, inhaled deeply through her nose, and retrieved her passport from her tote bag. She handed it over, her movements slow and deliberate. Tierney flipped it open. Velma Simmons. The name meant nothing to her. She scanned the pages. "You're traveling alone?" Velma nodded once. "And you have no carry-on luggage?" "Just that bag?" Tierney eyed the battered leather tote with disdain. It was actually a rare vintage Hermes, worth more than Tierney's car, but logos were for people who needed to prove they had money. Velma didn't need to prove anything. Velma nodded again. She reached for her passport. Tierney held onto it for a second longer than necessary, her eyes narrowing. "You need to speak when spoken to, Miss Simmons. It's a security protocol. Verbal confirmation is required." This was also a lie. A nod was legally sufficient for identity verification in this context. Velma knew the airline's regulations better than the crew did. She had spent the last week rewriting them, but she couldn't break her silence. Not yet. She tapped her throat and shook her head, mouthing the word "lost voice." Tierney let out a short, derisive huff. "Right, lost voice. Go ahead." She shoved the passport back at Velma, stepping aside with exaggerated reluctance. "Try not to disturb the other passengers." Velma took her seat in 1A, a private suite at the very front of the plane. She placed her bag under the ottoman and immediately put on her noise-cancelling headphones. She didn't turn on any music. She just wanted the silence. She closed her eyes, hoping to sleep before takeoff. But peace was not on the manifest today. 10 minutes later, the cabin was filling up. A heavy-set man in a bespoke suit, smelling of scotch and entitlement, took seat 1B across the aisle. This was Preston G. Davis, a hedge fund manager known for his temper and his platinum status with the airline. He was loudly complaining on his phone about the lounge service. Tierney was fluttering around him, pouring champagne before the plane even pushed back. "Mr. Davis, so good to see you again. Let me know if the temperature is to your liking." "It's fine, Tiff. Just keep the glass full," Preston grunted, ending his call. He glanced across the aisle at Velma. She was staring out the window, ignoring the world. Preston frowned. Hey, you." Velma didn't react. The headphones were top of the line. Preston leaned over, snapping his fingers. "I'm talking to you." Still nothing. Tierney, who had been watching from the galley, marched over. She didn't tap Velma gently on the shoulder. Instead, she reached out and aggressively yanked the headphones off Velma's head. The sudden intrusion made Velma flinch violently. She whipped her head around, eyes wide with shock. "Sir asked you a question," Tierney snapped, holding the headphones hostage in her hand. "And flight etiquette requires you to acknowledge your neighbors." Velma's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for her headphones, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She pointed at the headphones, palm open, demanding their return. "Don't snatch at me," Tierney recoiled, clutching the headphones to her chest like pearls. "Mr. Davis was just trying to be polite. You're being incredibly rude." Preston chuckled, enjoying the show. "I just wanted to know if you're in the right seat, sweetheart. Crew rest is usually in the back." The insult was distinct and pointed. Velma stared at him, her expression hardening into stone. She turned back to Tierney, her gaze intense. She gestured for a pen and paper. "I don't have time for games," Tierney hissed, leaning in close so the rest of the cabin wouldn't hear the venom in her voice. "I don't know how you got this seat. Points, employee standby, whatever. But you are on thin ice. In my cabin, you show respect. To me and to our diamond members." She dropped the headphones onto Velma's lap with a thud. "Buckle up, we're pushing back." Velma watched Tierney walk away, her back straight with self-righteous indignation. Velma put the headphones back on, but her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took not to speak. Not to say the words that would end Tierney's career right then and there. "Wait," she told herself. "Let them dig the hole." The plane taxied to the runway. The safety demonstration played on the screens. Velma watched the digital avatar demonstrate how to use an oxygen mask, her mind racing. She pulled out her phone. She had Wi-Fi access even on the ground, thanks to a prototype satellite link she was testing for the airline. She opened a secure messaging app. The contact was listed simply as Legal Anderson. Velma. "Send me the full personnel file for Flight 882, Senior Purser. Name tag says Tierney. Anderson. On it, Miss Simmons. Is there an issue? Should we contact operations? Velma. Not yet. Just get the file ready. And get the NYPD airport liaison on standby for when we land. I have a feeling I'm going to be arrested. Anderson. Excuse me? Velma. Just do it." The plane roared down the runway and lifted into the grey New York sky. For the first hour, things were quiet. Velma worked on her laptop, reviewing the asset liquidation spreadsheets for Meridian Airways. The airline was bleeding money. The service was atrocious. The staff morale was toxic. She had bought the company to save it, but she was realizing the rot went deeper than the balance sheets. It was in the culture. It was in Tierney. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Tierney came through the cabin with the meal service cart. She served Preston first, fawning over his choice of steak. When she got to 1A, her demeanor shifted instantly from warm hostess to prison warden. "Chicken or fish?" she asked, looking over Velma's head. Velma pointed to the menu item for the vegetarian option, a truffle risotto. "We're out," Tierney lied smoothly. She hadn't even checked the oven. "Chicken or fish?" Velma paused. She knew for a fact that first class was catered with 150% redundancy. There was no way they were out. She pointed to the fish. Tierney slammed the tray down. "Drink?" Velma pointed to the sparkling water. Tierney placed a plastic cup of tap water on the tray. "Sparkling is for paying customers. We're running low." Preston snorted from across the aisle. "Rough service for the freeloaders, huh?" Velma didn't touch the food. She didn't touch the water. She simply took a photo of the tray, the plastic cup, and then, subtly, a photo of Tierney's name tag as she walked away. That was the trigger. Tierney spun around, her eyes blazing. She had seen the flash. "Did you just take a picture of me?" The cabin went silent. Other passengers lowered their magazines. "That is a violation of my privacy and airline policy." Tierney's voice rose to a shriek. "Hand over the phone, now!" Velma shook her head. She locked the phone and slid it into the side pocket of her seat. She crossed her arms, staring straight ahead. Tierney marched to the interphone on the wall and snatched the receiver. She glared at Velma while she spoke to the cockpit. "Captain, we have a situation in first. Passenger in 1A. She's being non-compliant, aggressive, and just took unauthorized photos of the crew. She's refusing to communicate verbally. I don't feel safe." Velma closed her eyes. It was beginning. "Yes, Captain," Tierney said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "She's hostile. I think we need authorities on the ground." Tierney hung up the phone and turned back to the cabin, a smirk playing on her lips. She looked at Preston, who gave her a thumbs up. "Don't worry, folks," Tierney announced. "We don't tolerate harassment of our crew. The police will be waiting for her in London. Actually," she paused, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Captain says we're turning around. We're going back to JFK. We're not taking this behavior across the Atlantic." A collective groan went through the cabin. Preston slammed his hand on the armrest. "Are you kidding me? I have a meeting." "Blame her." Tierney pointed a long, red fingernail at Velma. "She's the security threat." The plane banked sharply to the left. They were dumping fuel. They were diverting. Velma sat perfectly still. She wasn't worried about the police. She wasn't worried about the diversion costs, which would run into the tens of thousands. She was calculating. Every minute this plane spent in the air was adding another zero to the settlement. She would eventually pay herself from the airline's insurance, and another nail in the coffin of Tierney's career. She retrieved her phone again. "Velma, change of plan. Meet me at the gate at JFK. Bring the board of directors, all of them. Anderson, the board? Velma, it's 7 a.m. on a Sunday. Velma, I don't care. Tell them the owner of the airline is being detained on her own plane. If they aren't there when the doors open, they're fired." Velma put the phone away and looked out the window as the New York skyline came back into view. She finally looked at Tierney. Tierney caught her eye and mouthed, "Bye-bye." Velma smiled. It was the first time she had smiled all morning. It was a cold, terrifying smile. The plane touched down with a heavy thud. The engines roared in reverse. As they taxied to a remote stand, the blue and red lights of Port Authority police cars were already visible, flashing against the grey tarmac. "Stay in your seats," Tierney commanded. "Police are boarding." The first-class door opened. The cold air rushed in, followed by 4 officers in tactical gear. "Who is the problem?" the lead officer barked. "Her," Tierney pointed at Velma. "Seat 1A. She assaulted me, refused crew instructions, and took illegal surveillance photos. She's a danger to the flight." The officer, a burly man named Sergeant Miller, marched up to Velma. "Ma'am, stand up. Hands behind your back." Velma stood up. She offered her wrists. She didn't resist. Tierney watched with glee as the metal cuffs clicked shut around Velma's delicate wrists. "Make sure you ban her," Tierney added. "Meridian Airways doesn't want trash like that flying with us." Velma paused as she was being led past Tierney. She stopped, forcing the officers to stop with her. She looked Tierney dead in the eye. She broke her silence. Her voice was raspy, deep, and commanded absolute authority. "You have no idea," Velma whispered, "who you just handcuffed." Tierney laughed. "I know exactly who you are, a nobody." Velma was shoved forward, down the jet bridge, and into the back of a squad car. The drama was just beginning. The holding room at the Port Authority police station was a drab box of cinder blocks, painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. It smelled of stale coffee and fear. Velma sat on a cold metal bench, her wrists still bound in stainless steel handcuffs. Most people brought into this room were crying, screaming, or begging for a lawyer. Velma was doing none of those things. She was sitting with her legs crossed at the ankles, eyes closed, rhythmically tapping her index finger against her thigh. She was composing an email in her head, the termination letter for the entire flight crew of Flight 882. Sergeant Miller, the officer who had dragged her off the plane, sat across from her at a scratched metal table. He was filling out paperwork, occasionally glancing up at her with a mix of annoyance and confusion. He was used to resistance. Silence unnerved him. "Look, lady," Miller grunted, clicking his pen. "You make this easy on yourself. You get processed faster. Name?" "You have my passport," Velma said, her voice still raspy but clear. "And you have my phone. If you unlock it, code 1985, you'll find a contact labeled Anderson. Call him." Miller rolled his eyes. "I don't need your lawyer yet. I need your statement. The flight attendant, Miss St. Clair, claims you were physically threatening and disrupted flight operations. That's a federal offense. You're looking at a no-fly list and potential jail time." Velma opened her eyes. They were dark, sharp, and utterly devoid of intimidation. "Officer Miller, do you know who pays for the fuel in the police cruisers patrolling the tarmac? Do you know who funds the annual Policeman's Benevolence Gala at the airport Marriott?" Miller frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Meridian Airways is the primary corporate sponsor for this precinct," Velma stated calmly. "And as of 4 a.m. this morning, when the Tokyo markets closed, Meridian Airways ceased to be a publicly traded entity controlled by a scattered board. It was acquired by a private equity firm called Vanguard Holdings." Miller stopped writing. "So, you follow the stock market? Good for you." "I don't just follow it." Velma leaned forward, the handcuffs clinking against the table. "I am Vanguard Holdings. I bought 40% of the airline's outstanding shares in a hostile takeover. I am the majority shareholder. I am the chairwoman of the board. And that plane I was just dragged off of? I own it. I own the seats. I own the engines. I own the uniform Miss St. Clair is wearing. Technically, Sergeant, you just arrested a woman for trespassing in her own living room." Miller stared at her. He looked at her worn sneakers, her messy hair, the cheap-looking leggings. Then he looked at the intensity in her eyes. A bead of sweat formed on his temple. He let out a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Queen of England. You're a delusional passenger who—" The heavy steel door of the interrogation room slammed open. The room was suddenly crowded. A man in a sharp, three-piece navy suit burst in, his face pale with panic. This was Anderson, Velma's chief legal counsel. Behind him were two other men, Chief of Airport Police, Captain Reynolds, and the Meridian Airways station manager, a man named George, who looked like he was about to vomit. "Uncuff her!" Anderson screamed, his voice cracking. "Good God, uncuff her right now!" Miller jumped up, hand going to his belt. "Whoa, back off! Who are you?" Captain Reynolds stepped forward, ripping the keys from his belt and shoving Miller aside. "Do as he says, Miller, you idiot!" Reynolds fumbled with the locks, his hands shaking. As the cuffs clicked open, Velma rubbed her wrists. She didn't say thank you. She didn't look at the police. She looked at George, the station manager. "George," Velma said softly. George flinched. Miss Simmons, I had no idea. The manifest just said it didn't have your VIP code attached." Stop," Velma raised a hand. "Where is the board of directors? They are gathering in the Meridian First Class Lounge as we speak," George stammered. "We called them, told them it was a code red emergency involving the new owner. They are terrified, Miss Simmons." Velma stood up. She stretched her neck. "Good, I want them terrified." She turned to Sergeant Miller, who was now pressed against the wall, his face the color of ash. He realized with a sinking horror that the crazy lady wasn't crazy. "Sergeant Miller," Velma said, "you were doing your job based on false information provided by a hysterical employee. I won't press charges against the department for false arrest." Miller let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Thank you, ma'am." "However," Velma continued, her voice hardening, "you will escort me back to the terminal. You, specifically. And you will bring 4 units of backup. We are going to have a little ceremony at Gate 42. Anderson handed Velma a fresh bottle of water and a tablet. "The flight was cancelled, Velma. The pilots timed out due to the diversion. The passengers are furious. They're all stuck at the gate." "Is Miss St. Clair still there?" Velma asked, taking a sip of water. "Yes," George nodded. "She's handling the rebooking. She's blaming you for the cancellation to anyone who will listen." Velma checked her reflection in the one-way mirror. She looked disheveled, tired, and utterly ordinary. "Perfect." "Let's go," Velma said. "It's time to introduce myself to my employees." Back at Gate 42, chaos reigned. The cancellation of Flight 882 had turned the waiting area into a riot zone. 200 passengers were crowding the desk, shouting at the 3 frazzled gate agents. In the eye of the storm stood Tierney St. Clair. She was thriving on the drama. She stood behind the podium, microphone in hand, projecting an air of martyred authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," she shouted, her voice shrill. "We are doing everything we can. As I've explained, this entire disruption is due to the security threat we removed from the plane earlier. One passenger ruined it for everyone. Meridian Airways prioritizes your safety over convenience." Preston G. Davis, the hedge fund manager from Seat 1B, was leaning over the counter, his face red. "I don't care about safety. I care about my meeting in Zurich. Get me on another flight." "Mr. Davis, I'm personally working on your transfer," Tierney cooed, switching to a customer service voice. "I've flagged your account as a victim of the incident. You'll get a voucher." Tierney felt invincible. She had successfully ejected a problem, asserted her dominance, and was now the hero trying to salvage the situation. She checked her phone. No messages from management yet. That was strange, but she assumed they were busy dealing with the paperwork for the arrest of that silent woman. She smirked, remembering the look on the woman's face as the cuffs went on. Trash, she thought. Absolute trash. Suddenly the noise in the terminal changed. The shouting at the desk died down, replaced by a low, confused murmur that rippled from the back of the concourse towards the gate. Tierney looked up. What now? People were parting ways. A corridor was forming through the crowd of angry passengers. Walking down the center of the terminal was a phalanx of people. In the lead were 4 uniformed police officers, including the sergeant who had arrested the woman earlier. But they weren't leading a prisoner. They were acting as a protective detail. Behind them walked a group of 6 men and women in expensive, severe business suits, the kind that cost more than a flight attendant made in a year. Tierney recognized one of them from the company newsletter, Charles Whitmore, the former CEO of Meridian. He looked pale and was walking briskly, as if trying to keep up, and in the center of this flying wedge of power, walking with a stride that ate up the ground, was the woman from Seat 1A. She was still wearing the leggings, still wearing the sneakers, but the handcuffs were gone. In her hand, she held a tablet like a weapon. She wasn't looking down anymore. Her head was high, and her gaze was locked onto the podium. Tierney froze. Her brain couldn't process the image. Why was the prisoner back? Why was the CEO walking behind her? The procession stopped 10 feet from the podium. The entire gate area fell silent. Even Preston stopped shouting. Velma stepped forward, leaving her entourage behind. She walked right up to the desk, climbing the small riser so she stood eye to level with Tierney. Tierney stammered, her confidence shattering. You can't be here! You're banned! Officer Miller! Why is she loose?" Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his face grim. "Stand down, Miss St. Clair." Velma placed the tablet on the podium, right on top of Tierney's boarding lists. She leaned into the microphone, her voice amplified through the entire terminal. "Can everyone hear me?" Velma asked. The crowd nodded, mesmerized. "Good," Velma said. "My name is Velma Simmons. 6 hours ago, I finalized the purchase of Meridian Airways. I am the new majority owner of this airline." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Preston's jaw dropped. Tierney felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the counter to stay upright. "No, that's a lie." Velma ignored her. She turned to the crowd. "I apologize for the cancellation of Flight 882. This flight was grounded not because of a security threat, but because of a gross failure of service standards and basic human decency. To apologize, every passenger on this flight will receive a full refund, plus $10,000 in travel credit, effective immediately." Cheers erupted. People began clapping. Velma held up a hand to silence them. She wasn't done. She turned slowly to face Tierney. The silence returned, heavy and thick. "Tierney St. Clair," Velma said, her voice amplified for all to hear. "You claimed I was a security threat because I didn't say hello to you. You claimed I was aggressive because I wanted my headphones back. You lied to the captain. You lied to the police. And you treated a paying customer, your employer in fact, like garbage because you didn't like the way I looked." Tierney was shaking. Tears welled up in her eyes, not of remorse, but of terror. "Miss Simmons, I didn't know. If I had known who you were, that," Velma cut her off, "is exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know I'm a billionaire to treat me with dignity. If you treat a silent woman in leggings like a criminal, but a man in a suit like a king, you don't belong in the service industry." Velma tapped the tablet. "I've just reviewed your personnel file, Tierney. 3 complaints in the last year, all dismissed by management. Not today." Velma turned to Charles Whitmore, the former CEO. "Charles, do I have the authority to make personnel changes on the ground?" Charles wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yes, Miss Simmons, absolute authority." Velma turned back to Tierney. "Tierney St. Clair, you are fired. Effective immediately. You are also banned from flying Meridian Airways. For life. You can find your own way home." Tierney let out a sob. "You can't do this. I have seniority." The union protects employees," Velma said coldly. "It doesn't protect liars who falsify police reports. Anderson?" The lawyer stepped up. "We are filing civil charges against Miss St. Clair for defamation and damages caused by the flight cancellation. We will be seeking restitution for the fuel dump and the passenger compensation. Approximate total, $400,000. Tierney gasped, clutching her chest. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then I suggest you get a good lawyer," Velma said. She pointed to the terminal exit. "Get out of my terminal, now!" Sergeant Miller stepped onto the riser. "Let's go, Miss St. Clair. Hand over your badge." Trembling, Tierney unpinned her silver wings, the wings she had worn for 15 years. She placed them on the counter. She looked at Preston, begging for help, but he looked away, pretending to study his shoes. As the police escorted a sobbing Tierney away, the crowd parted for her again, this time not with respect, but with awkward silence. She was gone. Velma took a deep breath. She turned to the other 2 gate agents, who were staring at her in petrified fear. "You too," Velma said. They jumped. Yes, Miss Simmons. Get these people rebooked, now. Yes, ma'am." They started typing furiously. Velma stepped down from the podium. She walked over to where Preston G. Davis was standing. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. "Mr. Davis?" Velma said pleasantly. "Miss Simmons," Preston squeaked. "Look, It was a misunderstanding. I was just joking earlier. I have a lot of respect for—" "You're a Diamond member, aren't you?" Velma asked. Yes, I am." "Not anymore," Velma said. "I'm revoking your status. We don't tolerate harassment of other passengers, regardless of their net worth. You can fly coach today, or you can fly another airline. Your choice." Preston opened his mouth to argue, saw the look in her eyes, and snapped it shut. "Coach is fine," he mumbled. Velma turned to her board of directors. They looked terrified. They knew that the storm hadn't passed. It had just made landfall. "Gentlemen, ladies," Velma said, gesturing toward the VIP lounge, "we have a board meeting. I have some ideas about culture change I'd like to discuss, and I'm going to need a coffee, a real one this time." She walked away, the board trailing behind her like ducklings. The passengers of Flight 882 watched her go, whispering in awe. Velma Simmons had arrived, and Meridian Airways would never be the same. Tierney St. Clair sat on the velvet sofa of her small Queen's apartment, a glass of cheap wine in her hand. The silence of her home was deafening, a stark contrast to the roar of the jet engines she had lived with for 15 years. She had been fired for 48 hours, and the shock was beginning to curdle into a toxic mix of self-pity and rage. She stared at her phone, scrolling through social media, desperate for validation. She had posted a long, tearful status update on her Facebook page earlier that morning. "Unjustly terminated by a power-hungry billionaire who doesn't understand safety protocols. I stood my ground for my passengers and paid the price. Please share." A few friends had commented with supportive emojis and "You go girl" messages, but the tide was turning against her, and it was turning fast. A notification popped up from YouTube. It was a link sent by her sister with the text, "Tiff, have you seen this? It has 3 million views." Tierney tapped the link. Her stomach dropped. The video was titled, "Silent Boss Goes Undercover and Destroys Entitled Flight Attendant." It was filmed by a passenger in row 2. The angle was perfect. It showed everything. It showed Tierney snatching the headphones. It showed her sneering at Velma's clothes. It showed her lying to the captain about the photo. And, most damning of all, it showed the finale at the gate where Velma revealed herself. Tierney watched, horrified, as the comment section rolled by like a waterfall of judgment. Asterisk user 123. "I flew with this woman last year. She yelled at my grandma for asking for water. Karma is beautiful." Asterisk fly guy 99. "Imagine owning 40% of the airline and getting treated like a stowaway." That face drop when she realized. Priceless. Asterisk justice serve. "She lied to the police. She tried to get an innocent woman arrested just because she didn't like her outfit. She belongs in jail." Tierney threw the phone across the room. "They don't know!" she screamed at the empty walls. "They don't know the pressure I was under." But the internet didn't care about her pressure. The video was trending #1 globally. Major news outlets were picking it up. The Daily Mail had already run a headline, "The $400,000 mistake. Flight attendant fires, back at billionaire boss." Desperation clawed at her throat. She needed to control the narrative. If she didn't, she would never work again. She retrieved her phone, noticing a crack in the screen. She opened TikTok and hit record. She put on her best sympathetic victim face, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Hi everyone," she whispered. "I'm the flight attendant from the video. I want to tell my side. The video is edited. It doesn't show how threatening she was being. She was giving me looks that made me fear for my life. And yes, She's rich, so she can buy the narrative. I'm just a working-class woman trying to pay rent, and now I'm being sued for $500,000 by a billionaire bully. Please, I'm setting up a legal defense fund. Link in bio. She posted it. Within an hour, donations started trickling in. $5, $10. People who hated the rich were rallying behind her. Tierney smiled, watching the balance rise. She convinced herself that she could win this. She could turn this into a movement. She didn't know that in a skyscraper in Manhattan, Velma Simmons was watching the TikTok video on a massive conference room screen. Velma sat at the head of a mahogany table. To her right was Anderson, her lawyer. To her left was Grant, a forensic accountant she had flown in from Chicago. She's doubling down, Anderson noted, watching Tierney fake cry on the screen. She's claiming you threatened her physically. That's libel, Velma. We can add it to the lawsuit. Velma swiveled her chair, her face unreadable. She's desperate. She's trying to make this a class war. The poor worker against the evil tycoon. If we just sue her, she becomes a martyr. I don't want to just win a lawsuit, Anderson. I want to expose the truth. She turned to Grant. What did you find in the inventory logs? Grant adjusted his glasses and pushed a thick file folder across the table. You were right to be suspicious about the "we're out of fish" comment on the plane. I did a deep dive into the catering manifests for Flight 882 over the last 6 months, specifically the flights where Miss St. Clair was the senior purser. Velma opened the file. Her eyes scanned the columns of numbers. It's not just fish, Grant explained. It's champagne, caviar, first-class amenity kits, high-end duty-free items like watches and perfumes. On her flights, the spoilage and breakage rates are 400% higher than the company average. Velma looked up. She's stealing. She's stripping the plane bare, Grant corrected. She marks the high-ticket items as broken or not loaded, and then they walk off the plane in her bag, or in the bags of her preferred crew members. We estimated the loss at about $15,000 per month, over 5 years. She's stolen nearly $1 million of inventory. Velma closed the file. The room went cold. So, Velma said softly, she wasn't just being rude to me because I looked poor. She was being aggressive because she didn't want me watching her. She was protecting her racket. Exactly, Anderson said. A silent, observant passenger in 1A is a smuggler's worst nightmare. She tried to kick you off to protect the goods. Velma stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Anderson, she said. Yes, Miss Simmons? Cancel the civil lawsuit. Anderson blinked. Cancel it? But she's defaming you online. She's raising money based on lies. If we sue her for money, she plays the victim, Velma said, turning back to them. But if the FBI arrests her for interstate commerce fraud and grand larceny, there's no GoFundMe for that. She tapped the file. Call the federal prosecutor. Tell them we have a present for them, and tell them to hurry. I want the arrest warrant executed while she's still live streaming. The raid happened 3 days later. Tierney was feeling confident. Her legal defense fund had reached $12,000. She had been invited to appear on a morning talk show the next day to discuss toxic workplaces. She was packing her bag for the studio, making sure to include her old uniform scarf, a prop to garner sympathy. She was live streaming again, propping her phone up against a stack of books. So guys, she told her 50,000 viewers, tomorrow is the big day. I'm going to speak my truth. We're not going to let these corporate giants crush us. I have evidence that boom, boom, boom. The pounding on her door shook the apartment. Tierney jumped, knocking over her wine glass. Police! Federal agents! Open the door! The chat on her live stream went wild. *user 88. OMG, is this real? *troll. 4. Life. They finally came for you. LOL. Tierney froze. Ignore that, guys, she stammered, her face pale. It's probably just... A prank. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. She stumbled back. It wasn't the local cops. It was men in FBI windbreakers. "Open the door, St. Clair. We have a warrant." Trembling, she unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open. 4 agents stepped in. Behind them, holding a clipboard, was a familiar face. It wasn't Velma. It was Grant, the accountant from the boardroom. "Tierney St. Clair?" the lead agent asked. "Yes," she squeaked. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit interstate theft." "Theft?" Tierney gasped. "I didn't steal anything. This is about the plane ticket. Velma sent you." The agent spun her around and handcuffed her. The second time in a week she had felt the cold steel, but this time there would be no release. "We're not here about a plane ticket, ma'am," the agent said, reading her rights. "We're here about the 300 bottles of Dom Perignon and 200 ounces of beluga caviar that you logged as spoilage and then sold on eBay under the handle Sky High Luxury. We tracked the IP address to this apartment." Tierney's knees gave out. She slumped against the agent, a dead weight. The live stream was still running. Thousands of people watched as the agents began to search the apartment. Grant stepped into the frame of the doorway. He looked at the pile of boxes in the corner of her living room, boxes clearly marked with the Meridian Airways logo. He pointed at them for the agents. "Check the bedroom closet, too," Grant advised the agents. "We believe she's holding the duty-free cart inventory there." An agent opened the closet. An avalanche of designer perfumes, cartons of cigarettes, and expensive chocolates tumbled out. The agent whistled. Jackpot. None. Tierney was dragged out of the apartment, weeping uncontrollably. "I can explain. Everybody does it. It's a perk of the job." "It's a felony, Tierney," Grant said calmly, as she was led past him. "And Miss Simmons wants you to know. The spoilage reports?" She read them all. The live stream finally cut out as an agent noticed the phone and switched it off. But it was too late. The image of the stolen goods pouring out of her closet was already screenshotted and shared 1,000,000 times. The narrative had shifted instantly. She wasn't a victim of a billionaire bully. She was a thief who had gotten caught because she was too arrogant to let a quiet woman sit in first class. Back at Meridian HQ, Velma watched the feed go black. She didn't smile. She just felt a sense of grim satisfaction. "Anderson?" she said, pressing the intercom button. "Yes, Velma. The rot is deeper than just Tierney." She said, "Everybody does it. I want a full audit of every senior purser in the fleet. If they stole so much as a bag of peanuts, I want them gone." "That could be half the staff, Velma. We'd have to ground flights." "Then we ground them," Velma said, her voice steel. "I'd rather fly 0 planes than fly a fleet of thieves. Burn it down, Anderson. We're starting over." She stood up. The easy part was over. Tierney was gone. But now came the hard part, rebuilding a broken company while half the world watched, and she still had a board meeting to get to. But as she gathered her papers, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She picked it up. "This is Simmons." "Miss Simmons?" A deep, distorted voice said. "You've made quite a mess. Tierney was useful to us. You shouldn't have looked into the cargo manifests." Velma paused. "Who is this?" "Let's just say Tierney's little perfume theft was the tip of the iceberg. You stopped the champagne smuggling, but you're interfering with something much more profitable in the cargo hold. Back off, or the next plane won't just turn around. It will go down." The line went dead. Velma stared at the phone. The drama with Tierney was over, but the real war had just begun. Velma stared at her phone, the threat echoing in her mind. The next plane won't just turn around. It will go down. Most CEOs would have called the FBI immediately. But Velma knew that if this operation was deep enough to threaten a plane crash, they likely had eyes inside the federal agencies, or at least the ability to disappear before agents arrived. She needed to trust her own circle first. Anderson, she called out, her voice dangerously calm. Get Grant back here, and tell him to bring the cargo manifests for the Zurich route. Specifically, anything Tierney-St. Clair was rostered on for the last 6 months. 20 minutes later, the three of them were huddled around the conference table. Grant looked exhausted, but focused. I found a pattern, Grant said, sliding a tablet across the table. It wasn't just Tierney. There are 4 other senior pursers who fly the exact same rotation. JFK to Zurich, Zurich to JFK. Every time they fly, there's a specific cargo pallet, listed as diplomatic pouch, exempt from scan. Diplomatic pouches are standard, Anderson argued. They're protected by international treaty. True, Velma said, studying the manifest. But look at the weight. A diplomatic pouch is usually documents, maybe 20 pounds. These pallets, they're weighing in at 400 pounds each, every single Tuesday and Thursday. Who is the sender? Velma asked. A shell company in New York, Grant replied, and the receiver is a private hangar in Zurich owned by Davis Global Logistics. Velma froze. Davis? As in Preston G. Davis? The man from Seat 1B, the man who had insulted her, who Tierney had fawned over. The man who was so desperate to get to Zurich that he had screamed when the flight turned around. He wasn't just a rude passenger, Velma realized, her eyes widening. He was the mule, or the handler. Tierney wasn't just stealing champagne. She was the onboard assurance. If customs got curious, she was there to smooth things over with the crew or distract authorities. But what are they moving? Anderson asked. Drugs? Gold? There's only one way to find out, Velma said. She stood up, grabbing her coat. Flight 884 leaves for Zurich in 2 hours. It's the evening service. The cargo is already being loaded. Velma, you can't, Anderson warned. The caller said, I own the airline, Anderson. She cut him off. I'm not going to sit in an office while they use my planes to smuggle God knows what. We're going to the tarmac. Underscore, 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 underscore. An hour later, under the cover of darkness and a driving rain, Velma, Grant, and a team of private security contractors stood on the wet tarmac near the belly of a Boeing 777. The cargo loaders were busy moving pallets. Velma spotted it immediately. A black, shrink-wrapped pallet with red, diplomatic, do not scan tape all over it. Stop, Velma commanded, stepping into the floodlights. The loading crew froze. A man in a high-vis vest walked over. Who are you? This is a restricted area. I'm Velma Simmons. Open that crate. The foreman crossed his arms. Can't do that, lady. It's diplomatic. Federal crime to open it. I'll take my chances, Velma said. She nodded to her security head, a massive man named Cole. Open it. Cole stepped forward with a crowbar. The foreman tried to block him, but Cole gently moved him aside like a piece of furniture. With a loud crack, the wooden crate splintered open. Inside there were no documents. There were no drugs. The crate was lined with foam. Nestled inside were rows of clear, vacuum-sealed canisters containing a silvery blue liquid. And in the center of the crate, strapped down, was a high-tech cooling unit. What is that? Grant whispered. Velma leaned in. The label on the canisters read, Prototype X9, Guidance Chip Components, Prohibited for Export. It's military tech, Velma breathed. They're smuggling stolen guidance systems for missiles. Davis is selling American defense technology to foreign buyers through Zurich. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. A bullet sparked off the tarmac, inches from Velma's foot. Cover! Cole screamed, tackling Velma to the ground behind the landing gear. From the shadows of the cargo terminal, 3 men were advancing, weapons drawn. Leading them was Preston G. Davis. You really should have stayed in the boardroom, Velma, Preston shouted over the rain. Do you know how much this shipment is worth? $500 million. You think I care about your little airline? He raised his gun, aiming at the exposed fuel line of the aircraft. "I told you, the next plane would go down. I'll blow this whole bird right now." Velma's mind raced. If he shot the fuel line, the explosion would kill them all and destroy the terminal. "Preston!" she shouted from behind the tire. "It's over. The FBI is already tracking the payments." "Liar!" Preston yelled. "Tierney was supposed to keep you distracted. That idiot ruined everything by getting fired." He took a step closer. "Say goodbye, Miss Simmons." Click. The airport floodlights suddenly went blindingly bright, focusing entirely on Preston. "Drop the weapon!" a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Preston shielded his eyes, looking up. Surrounding the cargo area were 4 SWAT trucks. Snipers were visible on the terminal roof. Sergeant Miller, the airport cop who had arrested Velma days ago, stepped out from behind a cargo container, his service weapon leveled at Preston's chest. "It's over, Mr. Davis," Miller shouted. "We heard the whole thing." Preston looked around frantically. He realized he was outgunned. He dropped the gun and raised his hands as the SWAT team swarmed in, tackling Preston and his goons to the wet pavement. Velma stood up, brushing the grease off her leggings. Sergeant Miller walked over, holstering his gun. He gave her a rare smile. "You called it, Miss Simmons. When you texted me about the diplomatic pouch, I checked with the State Department. It was fake." Velma nodded, adrenaline still coursing through her. "Thank you, Sergeant. I think you just earned a promotion." "I think I just earned a vacation," Miller laughed. "Maybe somewhere warm. Flying Meridian?" "First class," Velma promised. "On the house." 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a media spectacle. In the defendant's chair sat Preston G. Davis, looking small and defeated in an orange jumpsuit. He was facing charges of treason, arms trafficking, and attempted murder. In the gallery, sitting in the back row, was Tierney St. Clair. She was out on bail, awaiting her own trial for grand larceny. She looked haggard. The blonde hair was dull, the makeup gone. She watched Preston, the man she had served champagne to, the man she had bullied Velma for, and realized he had used her as a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. She had destroyed her career for a man who would have blown her up without a second thought. Velma Simmons stood at the podium. She wasn't there as a witness. She was there to give a victim impact statement on behalf of the airline. She wore a sharp white suit this time. No leggings. She looked every inch the titan of industry she was. "Your Honor," Velma began, her voice filling the silent room. "Meridian Airways was built on a promise of connecting people. But these defendants turned it into a vehicle for greed and destruction. Mr. Davis used my planes to sell weapons. Miss St. Clair used her badge to steal and bully." She turned to look at Tierney. Tierney couldn't meet her eyes. "But there is a lesson here," Velma continued. "A lesson about value. Miss St. Clair looked at me in seat 1A and saw nothing of value because I was quiet and dressed simply. She looked at Mr. Davis and saw value because he was loud and wore a suit." Velma paused. "We live in a world that is obsessed with the surface, but the rot is always underneath. I bought this airline to clean it up, and today the cleaning is finished." The gavel came down. Preston G. Davis was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without parole. Tierney St. Clair was sentenced to 3 years in prison for grand larceny, followed by 5 years of probation and restitution of $200,000. As Tierney was led away in handcuffs, she passed by Velma one last time. She stopped. "I'm sorry," Tierney whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I really am." Velma looked at her. There was no hatred in her eyes, only pity. "I know, Tierney. But in this life, your baggage doesn't just get checked. Eventually you have to carry it." Tierney bowed her head and was led out the door. 6 months later, Meridian Airways Flight 882 to Zurich was boarding. The cabin was pristine. The crew was smiling, genuinely. At the door stood a new senior purser, a young woman named Sarah. A passenger walked up to the gate. It was an older woman, dressed in worn sweatpants, looking exhausted and carrying a plastic bag. She looked out of place in the first-class line. Sarah didn't block her path. She didn't ask for extra ID. She didn't judge. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Sarah said warmly, checking the boarding pass. "Seat 1A. Let me help you with your bag." As the woman took her seat, she looked out the window. On the tarmac, a new plane was taxiing. It was the flagship of the new fleet. On the tail, painted in gold script, was the airline's new motto, Meridian, respect in every seat. And inside the terminal, watching from the glass window of the owner's suite, Velma Simmons took a sip of tea. She watched the plane lift off into the golden sunset, finally free of the weight that had held it down. She smiled. The sky was clear. So the next time you see someone quiet sitting in a corner, or someone dressed down in a fancy place, remember the story of Velma Simmons and Tierney St. Clair. You never know who you're talking to. They might just be the person who owns the building or the plane you're standing in. And remember, true power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait for the right moment to speak. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We drop new dramatic stories every week. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.